my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge one really significant detail of the arrangement here tonight. Since 2003, we've been able to bring to the college a Barbara McMurray professor. And this is a result of generous endowment provided by the local firm Barbara McMurray Architects. So Blanche Barber and current personnel at Barbara McMurray have combined to endow a $1 million gift to the College of Architecture and Design, which has allowed us to bring a significant internationally recognized architect to teach here in the college essentially every other year. So in 2013, the very first Barbara McMurray professor was Larry Scarpa of Scarpa, Brooks Scarpa in Los Angeles. And then in 2013, we had Wendell Burnett, the Phoenix architect here. And so just to say to the folks from Barbara McMurray who are here, thank you very much formally and publicly for this amazing support. It's part of what helps differentiate what we do here at the University of Tennessee and brings great value to the student experience. So thank you. So the 2018 Barbara McMurray professor is Billie Faircloth, partner and director of research at Timberlake, a practice based in Philadelphia. So founded in 1984, Timberlake has approximately 120 professionals, diverse backgrounds and abilities in a practice that's been recognized worldwide. Timberlake has been awarded hundreds of design citations in its history, including the Firm Award from the AIA in 2008 and the Cooper Hewitt National Design Award for Architecture from the Smithsonian Institute in 2010. Looking at their website, it includes this incredible soundbite that I wanted to share with you guys. It reads like this: "The alchemy of art, science, analysis, and intuition with regard to the built environment is our core mission." And I think that's a pretty cool mission statement. So some of the provocations that the firm has pursued over the years include re-envisioning the traditional building envelope, developing new techniques for off-site fabricated architecture, and building new tools for sustainable design. In the spirit of making change through meaningful collaboration, the firm also participates in lectures, conferences, symposia, and exhibitions around the world that augment their commitment to professional practice. And of course, Billie being here is an extension of that. Timberlake has been successful in maintaining a culture of continuous asking, even as the firm has ascended and grown, which from my point of view is no small feat, because I think that's exactly the pressure that's on firms as they grow and ascend nationally and internationally. They tend to lose the kind of core spirit that they have starting out, unless of course everyone commits to that. So I think that's a strong aspect of their firm that shows in the work. So likewise, the firm's commitment to research has provided a way for deep investigation to be conducted during the design process, and for the results of their work to stimulate and augment the process of designing and building. Exploratory, empirical, and applied research bring added value to commissioned architectural projects and allows the practice to develop new custom products and tools for the architectural industry. So, in her capacity at Timberlake, Billie leads a transdisciplinary group of professionals leveraging research, design, and problem-solving processes from fields as diverse as environmental management, chemical physics, material science, and architecture. She fosters collaboration between disciplines, trades, academies, and industries in order to define a relevant problem-solving boundary for the built environment. Her work centers around three main themes that I think we'll see tonight: justification and research methods for transdisciplinary and transscalar design practice, the design of novel methods, tools, and workflows that reveal new information about materials, climate, and thermodynamic phenomena, and how the history of plastics in architecture demonstrates architecture's changing posture towards transdisciplinary practices and new knowledge. Her interest in these topics was formed during her time at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture, where she taught between 2002 and 2008. But in 2008, she took an abrupt turn, and as she was offered the research directorship at Kieran Timberlake. So I think I'm advancing your slides. I could probably do the lecture. I know this so well. So since joining the firm, Billie has worked to prove that architecture should produce knowledge rather than merely consume it. And I think this is a fascinating approach that she brings to this. So her approach has resulted in peer commendation for a number of Kieran Timberlake research group projects, including Pointillist, a wireless sensor network, and Tally, a Revit-compatible custom life cycle assessment tool. So, and of course, both of these projects received national recognition and international recognition. She's taught, in addition to her work there, and since joining the firm, she's taught courses and themed workshops on materials, climate, thermodynamics at various institutions, at Penn, at Harvard's GSD, at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts, at the Simcar University in Israel, the University of Minnesota, Georgia Tech, and now the University of Tennessee. She's widely published on these topics, including in the Energy Forum, in the Journal of Architectural Education, in the PLIA conference proceedings, and Princeton Architectural Press. So please join me in welcoming Billie Faircloth.
Is this thing on? Everyone can hear me? In the back? You can get a thumbs up? All right, great. First, I want to thank the University of Tennessee for inviting me and inviting Kieran Timberlake into the school and into the college. This has been an amazing experience. It's been incredible to work with all of the students in the studio. Scotty, thank you. It's been incredible to work with you. It's been amazing. I also want to thank, you warned me this would happen. Sorry. I want to make sure that we again thank Barbara McMurray and thank you for this endowment and for funding this possibility that firms can come in, that we can create discourse, and that we can create a meaningful relationship between what the resources of the academy and the resources of practice. This has been a really incredible and rich and enriching semester, I hope, for the students, but also for me personally and for our firm. Tonight I want to talk about our practice. I'm actually going to touch on about 22 projects. And that's because what I'm going to show you is the way that we use questioning, searching and searching again, as a mode that operates throughout design. It's a mode that actually increases the agency or power of the architect. And I want to use that word agency specifically and literally, and I want to begin by just asking us to consider what that means. So I'm going to turn on my teaching mode for a second, get out of my lecture hat, and just say, what is agency? What's design agency? Have you heard the phrase? Have you discussed the phrase? Is there a robust discussion about agency here at the school? What's agency? Political agency? Moral agency? There's all different kinds of agency. What's design agency? Does anyone want to take a pass? Students from 6 Facts, 6 Scales? Please? Students from my studio? Please? No? That's right, Pruitt. Yeah, the power that we have to cause a change. So design agency, let's think about that for a second. What is design agency? We have this amazing power to use the process of design to create change in the world. And often what I've found in my own career is that we're constantly questioning the extent of that power or the range of that power. And what we found at our practice is that that power can extend quite a bit. If you were to come to our office and spend some time with us, you will see that every day we're asking how far we can extend the boundary around what we include and what we exclude when we design. You might come to our office and see us out on the sidewalk doing things like this just on a day-by-day basis. Now, we have projects, we have clients, they have schedules, but on a day-by-day basis, it's what you choose to do and how you choose to design. And the things that you engage on a day-by-day basis that actually can matter. And when you allow an entire group or organization or a community to embrace questioning as part of the core infrastructure for the design process, wonderful things happen. You begin to ask some really primary questions. So this group of people is mired in a debate about this thing. And this thing, we affectionately refer to as the apparatus, is holding a bunch of glass samples. And the debate is, which color is the glass? Which color is the glass when I turn it a certain angle? And how does the color of the glass then relate to what my intention is as a designer? It turns out that everyone sees the color of the glass slightly differently, right? That's an interesting thing. You might also find us just out front on our sidewalk doing experiments like this, especially in the summer. We're doing a very, very quick mock-up because we're trying to understand something about water flow across a very specific surface, and running a really quick, rough experiment. It's what I would call a low-fidelity prototype, just to begin to ascertain the slope of a surface and the speed at which water flows across the surface. More recently, just 2 weeks ago, we were working on some masonry mock-ups in our shop. We were working with some members from the International Masonry Institute, masons who came in. We were asking a really basic question. I would almost call these sketches with bricks and mortar. We were asking a basic question about the head joint on a curve. And while we had an incredibly high fidelity Revit model, and we were running scripts that would allow us to adjust these head joints, we also wanted to in turn create a prototype and go through the entire process of working with those joints as well. And so we were just simply using our shop as a space where we can build and work through these types of details. I don't know, would you call this research? Does that word unsettle you a bit? Does it confuse you? If I say searching and searching again, does that feel more comfortable to you? The truth is, I deeply believe there has never been a more pressing moment than now to test the boundaries of our design agency. And there's a reason for that. When we design, our power lies in the ability to inscribe a boundary around what we are going to include and what we're not going to include. So if I have students in here from 6 Facts, 6 Sales, yeah, do I have any students in here? A couple? From the seminar course we're working on? One of the things we're working on is really trying to understand that boundary. And one of the things that we work on at Kieran Timberlake on a day-by-day basis, again, is trying to understand the boundary that we're drawing around what we include and what we exclude, and how deeply we can understand design as a multivariant endeavor. So when we go to work on a building like this, which is the U.S. Embassy in London, the day-to-day working out of the U.S. Embassy in London over a 3.5, 4-year period required, yes, a lot of design, as you can imagine it, but also a lot of slowing down, vetting questions, extending our knowledge, going into areas that may feel a little uncomfortable, bringing people into the conversation that would allow us to ask targeted questions and conduct targeted types of analysis through prototypes, computation, simulation, measurement that would give us actionable information so that we could continue the process, so that we could engage design, so that we could, in fact, increase the goals for that building. We search and search again because we believe that searching and searching again increases our agency, our power to cause a change, and it also increases the value of architecture. We also have a tendency to, because of our design philosophy, put our searching and searching again into these 4 buckets. We recognize, and actually I think this is one of the more exciting things, as research processes, as searching and searching again processes become more rigorous and robust in architectural practice, as they begin to be paired with design, what I see emerging is a profession and a practice where different design philosophies are allowing these buckets to be named differently. And I think that's an amazing landscape for our profession to allow different research topics to emerge. But here in Timberlake, we have a tendency to focus on environment, material systems, and processes, and quite often it's the interface between these things, the interface between environment and materials, looking at phenomena in materials simultaneously, the interface between systems and materials or processes and materials. And it is true, as was stated in the introduction, we have worked towards a transdisciplinary practice. We are transdisciplinary. What we mean by that is we realized many years ago that in order to get at the kind of design practice that we knew was possible, we had to extend the design process from the allied disciplines. So yes, we work with structural engineers, civil engineers, electrical engineers, etc. But we wanted to extend design practices and processes to those disciplines that had knowledge that seemed to overlap with the way we understood how architecture worked in the environment, but that were nonetheless not represented in the design process. And this includes people with knowledge in materials engineering, or knowledge in environmental management, or knowledge in computer science or chemical physics. In 2008, we began to expand upon an already 20-year endeavor to integrate research and design. We began to expand upon that endeavor and formalize it into a transdisciplinary group. We are transdisciplinary. We do projects period. We do architecture, we do software, we work on concepts, we establish research as a project, which means it's not done at night, it's not done under the cover of darkness, it's not done on the weekends. It is in fact part of our process. Again, this mode that extends our agency. And we identify questions that are expression of our design philosophy. Question mark is central infrastructure in our practice. We mature techniques, we capture and share our results. This is how we're organized. It's a brief sketch of our practice, but it's true and it's accurate. So, many of you have already visited Karen Timberlake, which is great. Some of you have seen the space and our office, but this really is the platform upon which all of this questioning and our projects play out on a day-by-day basis. We have an organization that allows people to move freely across the office. We are organized into teams, but we also have an organization that allows those people who are part of the research group, and yeah, there's about 13 research group members. There's also a communication group that has about 8 members, and then there's a whole other group of architectural design staff that's right around 60 or so people. We have a total of about 100 individuals, but what I really like about the shot of the pulse of our office is you can't tell who's having a conversation with whom. You can't tell exactly what's happening. That's because we have an integrated process. When we do projects, all of those folks are at the table all at once. Right? Everyone's there all at once, and so our projects have a tendency, yes, again, to look like buildings, but also to look like software, to look like scripts. I think the more important thing is that our projects have a tendency to range scales, to range concerns. We focus on certain parts of building delivery methods. We can focus on whole entire buildings. And as I mentioned, the question mark is an essential piece of infrastructure. This slide actually captures a whole range of questions we've asked. I keep track of the questions that we ask on a weekly basis. They're categorized into a database. People answer those questions through a rigorous process. But what's really important about all of these questions is that everybody on this floor has the ability as a designer, no matter which group they originate from, to ask those questions, again, to extend their design agency into areas and subject matter for which they may not be an expert, but they may have curiosity about, or they may be interested in discovering more about. The other thing that you could probably note, if you just look really deeply at these, like what's going on up there, funny question, not too specific. I wouldn't advise answering it just as it's stated. We don't know where up there is, but I'll show you. Which factors best characterize the site? Can we locate and measure a multitude of spatio-temporal urban microclimates? The other observation you can make is, wow, all these questions do require a whole range of different methods to solve them, which means that, again, in order to extend our agency, we've had to develop those methods. So we have matured a platform of methods and techniques. Ours is a multi-method approach. So we regularly engage tool development, we regularly engage sensor deployment, we like to measure stuff when it makes sense. We also engage bespoke computation and simulation because we're asking these targeted questions, and wow, computation is a really nimble tool that allows us to get at targeted questions. We also engage prototyping. Methods can be incredibly powerful. Tooling up methods can be incredibly powerful when you know the question that you're asking. So, as part of our firm, our questioning is extended through the entirety of the process. And often I get asked, okay, you can ask questions, we can all be curious, but just how rigorous is this? It's one thing to ask questions and to bring technical information to answer a question, but it's another thing to realize that questioning is both a technical endeavor, but let's face it, more often than not, we're interested in the social component of answering a question. We're interested in capturing that knowledge and understanding that once we've captured that knowledge, we need to share it. So we've also developed ways of sharing the knowledge that we capture, both internally and externally. We have an entire process for doing that through something called a red report, through something that's called a research query, where every individual in our office can capture the question that they're asking, as I mentioned before, write out a method, write out a value statement for why they're asking it, put to that question, think through, design a method to answer that question. We communicate the results weekly, and we have them all situate all these results in a, and I like to, results are a funny word. It sounds like so quantitative, but really these are write-ups about designers trying to engage something, right? They take on various forms, but it's an important practice in our office, just like drawing an idea. Writing up findings is absolutely a practice that people are embracing in our firm. We can find all of these findings in a database. But we also have ways of communicating our work, obviously through our books. It's an important part of our work is to build up discourse, especially through books like Refabricating Architecture. We also seek review. We seek to expand the work that we do out into a community of architects. Okay? That's important. Share your work. We seek commendation for our work, and increasingly we seek to extend the questions that we've asked into the creation of tools, the questions that we've answered into the creation of tools that can be distributed into the profession. So a really simple question that we began to answer in 2013, how do we calculate the embodied environmental impacts of our choices? When I select this carpet, when I select this wood base, when I'm working on a design, can I also bring this other layer of decision making into the design process to really understand what it means to pick that wood and pick this carpet from the point of view of embodied environmental impacts. That means emissions to land, air, and sea. Can I understand that? And once we begin to realize, yes, actually, we can create an environment for designers to access that data as they're designing. We can create a design integrated process. We also begin to understand that we have a responsibility to take that process that we came up with, this novel process, and make it such that everyone in our profession can engage it. Increasingly, many of the questions we ask, we realize, are ones that other designers want to answer as well, and so we can distribute those. Our milestones, and the reason why I put this slide in here is because I want to impress upon the students in the room that our practice, what we have worked towards, and what I also personally have worked towards in my career, is designing a practice. So our milestones are intentional. We pursued a transdisciplinary practice. We pursued a practice where research would be a process, and it would be ISO certified, which means that we can go back and we can write down what we say we're going to do. We can look ahead, and we can do what we say we're going to do. We can look backwards to see if we did it, right? I mean, it's just a plan, do, monitor, learn process. It was intentional to create a transdisciplinary group, to hypothesize that that was necessary and needed in the profession, and to go after the creation of that group. It was very intentional for us more recently to formalize a collective intelligence-based staffing model, so that when you looked at a project team, no longer would it look like, here's the architectural project team, but it would look like a diverse grouping of individuals with different types of knowledge that could really begin to represent these core strengths of Pure and Timberlake. This is intentional. And we were able to achieve these milestones because we intended to design a practice this way. So if you're able to build up research as a mode, and you have the capacity to use research to extend your agency, then you have a way of working across days, months, years, using this mode. I've had 10 years of working through this mode, of seeing how it plays out. And I now am in a position of reflecting upon how it has worked and what it has allowed us to do. When we research, when do you research, Billy? This is the question I get asked a lot. What does it look like? How does it play out? You say it extends the agency of the designer, but really, on a day-by-day basis, what does it look like? So this lecture is my effort to explain to you a little bit of what it looks like. Okay? That's really what we're going to do here, and that's why we're going to touch on 22 different things. So one of the more powerful things that we've done in our office is to ensure, again, as I've given you a snapshot, that we have infrastructure in office to allow anyone at any moment in time to say, hey, I've got a question, I want to answer it, I think this is a legitimate question, can we come up with a method to answer this question? Right. That's the day-by-day pulse of Pure and Timberlake. So I'm going to frame that day-by-day pulse by showing you this question. What are the possible patterns resulting from variations in wood's figuration, width, thickness, and length? Now, that question might look familiar to some. Does that look familiar? Does that feel kind of familiar to anyone? It represents a lot of what we do as designers. We're trying to look at and balance all these multiple variables. We're working through parameter-driven design questions. We're actually trying to look at the relationship between these things, right? Variation in wood's figuration, so that's the grain. We're looking at the width. This question was asked in the context of forming a wall. Forming a wall out of concrete. It was asked in the context of board form concrete for a very, very specific project. It was documented like this. That's a research query. But it was really started because of this project, Wellesley Pendleton West. It's an addition right there in the center. On this side of the screen is a 1934 building designed by Charles Cotter. It's Pendleton Hall. and over there on your left is Paul Rudolph's Jewett Heart Center. We were linking the two. And if you know Wellesley's campus in Massachusetts, you know that it's characterized by some amazing vegetated landscape that connects knoll after knoll after knoll, or building quad after building quad together. And this tiny addition was asked to do a lot. It was asked to actually become a new threshold or a new front door to get into what is referred to as the arts quad. Now, we were interested in answering this question because part of the team, and you talk about alchemy, Jason, you pulled that quote out earlier, part of the intuition that we were using, and one of the reasons we were interested in the concrete is because we were interested in creating a bark-like texture on the concrete. Not a literal impression of the bark, but a bark-like texture on the concrete. The impression of wood on the exterior and the true expression and performance of wood on the interior in this volume where we have musicians and vocalists who are practicing on a daily basis. So we started like this. We started the design iteration like this around design development. You can step back and look at these and say, these look pretty clunky, Billy. What's going on? Right? What's going on here is that what we're doing is we're developing our tacit knowledge. We were working with concrete mix design. We were simply setting up a series of samples that would allow us to understand those variables. So each of these samples have boards that are at different depths related to each other. The surface finish is slightly different. Some are sanded more, some are sanded less, which allows the summer wood configuration to press through on the concrete a little bit more. We have some board spacing going on, thick and thin. But these were our first samples, which turned into some tests that were initially done on site, over here on the left, by the contractor who looked at our samples. We had a discussion with the subcontractor, and there was an attempt to recreate those samples. But once we saw them on the site, we realized, no, this really isn't it. This isn't it. So this is the finished one on this side. This is what we were after. And so what this turned into was realizing that we needed to do a study in randomness. We needed to look at thinner boards, thicker boards. We really needed to begin to understand how to leverage this pattern. This is when we introduced a script. After we had understood the variables that we were working with and what mattered to the expression of the concrete, we were then able to better target a script that allowed us to begin to search for a series of random patterns, and then we were able to export those surface patterns and also test them, visualize them in order to look at and study the shade-shadow conditions. What was really great about this process is that once we began to produce these almost like paint-by-number drawings, they became the means by which we could communicate with the contractor. So then the contractor started really getting involved in helping us create new notations and to refine the script that we were working on, and it resulted in a series of shop-like drawings that were the means of communication. But all of this resulting from these early explorations with these prototypes. Often on a day-by-day basis, we are asking questions that require modeling, simulation, prototyping, but a rigorous way of answering those questions. How do changes in opening size and soffit angle affect daylight quality and experience of glare? Asked on the same project. You can see the practice space right there at the center. We're simply working in a completely different way, non-digital, recognizing that sometimes there are phenomena that are better experienced and studied with the eye. Here, in this case, we simply had a model that was mounted on a tripod. It was a flexible model. We could cut openings, we could block openings, we could put in a camera and strategically photograph the interior and begin to search through size and scale and form of opening that would allow us to eliminate direct light, but also create a type of glow on the interior of that space. So you're probably getting, I hope you're getting the picture, right? That as we go through design on a day-by-day basis in our office. Along the way, we can mark the design process through a series of inquiries that are often extending the realm of our knowledge. So these types of assessments that were done for one project in our office, for a project called 181 Mercer at NYU, or at New York University, this is a trail of these types of research queries on a day-by-day basis, and all of these point to asking questions that, asking types of questions where the answer is not so direct. I can't look it up in a book, I can't see it. For instance, we were interested in really understanding the variation of temperature and humidity across the site. It required the distribution of sensors. We were interested in the variability of wind speed and direction because we had 5 surrounding regional airports, all with different wind speed conditions. Often the data for designing the building is coming from those airports and from Central Park. But in this instance, we knew that the site was very, very different. So this type of nimbleness to ask across subject matters and to ask periodically is part of our design process on a daily basis, which means we can inquire about, as I just revealed, actual site conditions versus the site conditions at an airport. So this project in the Pacific Northwest, we simply very rigorously distributed a series of sensors that allowed us to understand the microclimate on the site versus the data that we were getting from the airport. In this instance, we're able to inquire about the performance of a building envelope and understand the thermodynamic phenomena in this existing building. Propane tanks were put in by the client. The building was heated up to cool it down. And as it was cooling down, we were able, by embedding some of our sensors, about 60 sensors in the building envelope, we were able to really begin to understand the performance of that exterior wall. Much of our inquiry deals with direct building elements and the interface between design process and designers who are, in this instance, trying to work on a screen element and fabrication processes. Right? Sometimes our daily inquiry mashes up a couple of different things that we're interested in. So in this instance, we have a client who is working on a gallery, and in that gallery, there are some very specific requirements for how people traverse and how people interact with certain elements. And we were interested in analyzing how pedestrians would flow through that gallery, but simultaneously interested in having a very broad conversation with the decision makers on that project that represented the client over a gallery-sized model, right? So that model is a quarter-scale model. It's very big. And we wanted to represent these different options and the way people might interact with these different options by using something called projection mapping on that model. Quite often, our inquiry extends into just straightforward comparative analysis. Here we're looking at embodied environmental impacts of these fin components at Brown University. Sometimes we're looking at phenomena like light and frit in the experience, in this instance, of this entire building element or building component. Sometimes we're working on just the frit alone and the surface texture of that frit, asking a question about the potential random patterns of alphanumeric characters on a facade. So the day-by-day questioning then is one that allows designers to interact with this design process or this research process in a really meaningful way. It does extend our agency, especially when we have folks in our office who have various backgrounds and various methods. I think one thing to note is that again, it's hard to figure out how this happened, so we just put together this little video. You can get a little bit of sense of the last one from the point of view of some of the folks that worked on it.
So we have this east-facing facade, and we like to give it some character, but We also would like to preserve the view. So fritting is a great option because of the translucency that you get. But we also wanted this pattern to read at 2 different scales. We'd like for it to read at a civic scale from all the way down to the street, but we'd also like for it to read at a small scale for the users inside the building. For reasons relating to the history of the building, we looked at a pattern comprised of letters. And to give the letters the civic scale reading, we looked at different ways to create gradients in patches that are 30 feet wide and 16 feet tall. And at the densest, this gradient would shield from heat gain. At the lightest, it would mitigate bird strike potential in the area.
This project really explores what it means to be random. We can quickly generate a script in terms of randomness, but we worked with a variety of graphic designers, architects, building performance specialists to make this pattern read in a way that is figural, that is gestural, that has kind of character. We really had to develop a language to talk about this design together. I think that's where computation was really interesting, because we started off designing this by hand on swatches to kind of get that proper gesture. And so as the graphic designers started to create this pattern, in order to make this be applied to like such a large surface, we had to unpack each kind of step and really understand the design decisions that were being done manually so that we could apply them on a larger scale computationally.
So for a project like the U.S. Embassy in London, if we just look at images of it, I hope what you've begun to understand that the backstory of a building like this for us is structured inquiry. That actually gives us, again, the ability to create the effects that we want to create and the ability to increase the goals of the buildings that we create for our clients. I mean, the U.S. Embassy in London, and one of the elements on this building that received a lot of prototyping attention and analysis attention is the ETFE scrim, or exterior envelope, right over the glass on the building. Here it is from the interior and from one of the interior gardens. But the analysis for this particular element took all sorts of forms. We wanted to understand it phenomenally, but we also needed to understand it structurally as a single layer tension membrane that had to take on a very specific shape. We also wanted to understand how to integrate photovoltaics into the surface and try to achieve something that had yet to be achieved with single layer tension membranes at the time. Which means that we had to look at how the single layer tension membrane was stressed through different form finding exercises. We had to look at how those forms then related to the output of light, the output of energy, and look at the form in relationship to PV potential. We also had to look at the form in relationship to all the different ways of adding the other elements that stabilize the actual curve of the single layer tension membrane. This required a whole series of prototypes, both partial scale prototypes and full scale prototypes with our partners, where we look at the balance of system components required for the PV integration. It also required us to step back and say that there were some things that we actually couldn't test, but we could intuit. We knew that the ETFE would reflect and diffuse and refract light in certain ways. We actually had research queries that suggested that there have to be ways for us to visualize this. We tried and tried, but it was actually hard to do. And so once the building was actually built, we were able to begin to capture some of the quality from this material that we were after, and really begin to understand at scale some of the phenomenal effects, meaning that there's some questions you ask that you can't really answer. But what's really important about just looking at the images of this project is that when you see images of this project, Cellophane House. Cellophane House is, again, made of in this instance, PET membrane stretched in a frame, integrated with thin film photovoltaics. It's a 5-story or 4-story prototypical dwelling installed as part of MoMA's home delivery show in 2008. This is an important moment for us. So the New London Embassy just completed in 2017. I just went back in time to 2008 and showed you something where there's some material similarities here. I can go back in time even further to 2003 and show you SmartWrap. SmartWrap, which is a prototypical facade. This is the working portion of it down here that integrates power, light, integrates thin film transistors. Basically, is trying to integrate systems of a building by using a family of what are called organic printable materials on a PET substrate. So often when it comes to extending your agency through questions and then backing up those questions with action, what you're doing is you're seeding your future work. You're recognizing that, and we recognize this in our work, is that the questions that we ask today, some of them we can't answer, but we can basically begin to build up a body of work that allows us to continue to carry that work in the future, which means that the embassy benefits from the investment that we made early on in trying to pursue a novel material like SmartWrap. The embassy envelope doesn't exist without the cellophane house, which doesn't exist without SmartWrap, which really doesn't exist without our investment in trying to pursue these types of novel technologies. One of the other aspects of searching is that not only does it integrate into the design process, but allows you to step back. It allows you to look at the things you've created. Now, I'm sure you've all had this thought that when you look at the built environment, you probably are asking, this is one big test bed. Like, why can't we really understand buildings? Why haven't we measured? Why haven't we really understood what we've created? Right? When you take up the agency to research, you're also taking up another type of agency, which is one of my favorite types of agency. You're taking up the agency to characterize, to describe the nature of something, so much so that you can use the nature that you've described as inputs for design. So what are the spatial and temporal dynamics of urban open space? Urban open space. We all enjoy urban open space. When we go to design urban open space, we wonder, how does this work? How does it perform? What are the factors that contribute to a thriving and robust urban open space? What if we could study those types of spaces in our cities? What if we could understand the factors that actually contribute to good design of urban open space? This is taking up the agency of describing the nature or character of something and seeding future design work so that we can use our findings to inform our design. We did this at Love Park in Philadelphia. We made a proposition to the city, or actually to the Fairmount Park Conservancy at the time, and to the city to simply go into Love Park. And how many of you have been to Love Park? Old Love Park, new Love Park. Some of you might know that Love Park, like this, it has been completely redesigned. Right? But Love Park is a thriving open space in Philadelphia, a really important space in the center of the city. Had very mature trees, a very mature series of vegetative areas around the exterior, and it's always a thriving place to be in the city. It was simple. Create a survey methodology that allows us to understand the relationship of people and space, mark those people in space, censor the space, understand the relationship of trees to materials, to people, to their activities, and just simply look at the data and see if we can come up with some conclusions about the relationship between all of those multiple variables in open space. That project translated directly a year later into a similar set of questions about the factors that contribute to interactions in an urban emergency room in Philadelphia. We worked with Jeff Design, one of the, I think the only design thinking program for future medical doctors in the U.S., founded by Dr. Bon Ku. And he saw our Love Park study and said, I want you to do this in my space. I want to understand how healthcare providers and patients interact, because I'm always trying to modify my rooms. I'm always moving things around. Things aren't in the space they should be. I have patients in the hall. I have real problems. Can we just describe what's going on here? The power to describe is one that we should take up again and again and again in order to know what we've done and what we've created. This also applies simply to vegetation. We have a long-running series of inquiries that are just simply trying to characterize trees. Trees on sites, especially in this site, and again in Philadelphia, mature tree canopy. How do we understand the contribution of leaf on, leaf off to a future building that's going to sit right there in that parking lot? And can we begin to understand those trees and adequately model those trees? Again, we can extend this power to characterize to some really in-depth studies, like this study on our green roofs. Our green roof vegetation study allowed us to go back to a whole range of roofs, about 8 total roofs that we had designed. This is the study that originates from the question, what's going on up there? And really what we're simply trying to understand is the relationship between all of the engineering layers under this thin layer that we like to describe as just a green line, right? All the vegetation. We're trying to understand what's going on under there versus what's going on top, because what we've realized is that we spied a roof that we had designed 7 years prior across the way, and it was out of control in terms of growth. And we began to realize, wait a minute, we planted 6 species, but that looks more like 65, right? What happened? What's going on? Recognizing that when you have such an amazing amount of biomass, all of a sudden the way you think about the thermodynamics of that roof changes. All of a sudden the way you think about water begins to change. And so going back to roofs like this and being able to create data like this, 2006, 6 species. 12, 13, right? It just begins to give us a snapshot, a way of thinking and characterizing what we've done in relationship to solar regimes, in relationship to drainage regimes, realizing that there's a relationship between the form and slope of that roof to the vegetative cover and species richness and biodiversity of the roof. Often we're trying to describe the nature of something. That is true for this project as well. It's a project that we did at the Royal Danish Academy, or with the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts Center for Information Technology. We were working with a group within a very broad transdisciplinary group, and we were working specifically with phase change materials. It was a simple and complex and complicated project because we were trying to fully couple a prototype that's embedded with about 60 sensors to a simulation of this material turning solid and turning liquid, which means we had to know the physics associated with the flow of that liquid once it was liquid. We had to know all of the material properties. We had to know something about heat flow. We were working closely with someone who understands the first principles of thermodynamics, and we were simply trying to couple a physical prototype with a digital model for a very, very specific reason. But this is simply what's there. You know, it's really straightforward. It's a series of vacuum-formed shells. The shells are then filled with phase change materials in liquid form. Phase change materials are programmed to go from solid to liquid at a very, very specific temperature. And they hold that temperature for a very specific reason, which is pretty interesting. We were working with prototypes in 2 locations because some of our partners are in Copenhagen, some of them are in Philadelphia. You can see all the sensors in that surface. And then those sensors are geolocated, or the prototype's geolocated, the sensors are geolocated. They're fully represented in a digital model. We're getting readings off the sensors in 5-minute increments. We're adjusting the test bed. And what we're simply trying to do is to figure out what's going on over there at really specific time steps Because what we've done is we've also created a virtual version of what's going on over there. And if we have both of them side by side, we can actually get this digital version to be really accurate and all of a sudden represent a really complex phenomena of phase change. And if we can do that, if we can create a digital version of this, what that means is that we can give this simulation platform to anyone in this room, and you can work with complex phase change phenomena. And ultimately, you begin to create surfaces and surface effects that are quite intentional. Ones where you're able to basically say that I want to create a surface that goes from a complete hatch, that's the white, to a series of dashes, to a series of dots. Can we control the geometry now that we understand and have a calibrated simulation platform? Can we control the geometry so much so and begin to run through a series of simulations and search for forms of those shells that would result in a hatch dot dash pattern? And can we begin to look and understand how that hatch dot dash pattern happens over time? Coupling real-world phenomena with simulation, again, extends your agency. It's a way of understanding how precise you can be, how much play there is in a system, right? Same is true. We're doing something very similar with the Loblolly house. This is the Loblolly house last year. Now, this is what it looks like when it was built. You notice a difference? I'll go back. You notice a difference? Yes, okay, the wood is weathered. Now, what do you think? Should we even go here? Like, what if we could control or understand how wood weathers? What if we could simulate how wood weathers? We actually asked that question. Could we simulate and then begin to control it? Well, all we're looking at is color change. We're just simply looking at color change, or where coloration occurs and why. And it turns out it's driven by wind, it's driven by UV exposure, and it's driven by water. These are phenomena that we're familiar with. So when we begin to look at the Loblolly house, there's a whole range of experiments embedded in this house. An experiment of reorganizing a supply chain, of building it out of one tool, of working with chunks and panels, of actually saying, well, at the end of its useful life, we want to be able to return it back to the forest. But this experiment begins to suggest that we could go back to the Loblolly house, really survey and create useful maps of coloration, and begin to take a very rough sketch of a simulation platform that predicts wood weathering for another building and turn it into a more precise simulation platform that would look at this phenomena board by board. And that would ultimately allow designers to interact with weathering as part of the design process. And that's really where we've taken questions like that and extended those questions into platforms for designers in our office to use and for designers in the profession to use. So as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to a software like Tally, simple question: what are the embodied environmental impacts? Can we measure them as we're designing? And we said yes. We were able to answer yes, able to answer yes to that question, and then develop a robust method based on life cycle assessment to do that. Often, these types of platforms start out as these types of projects. We actually just completed this really quick sketch just last weekend. We called it Holy Frit, which is supposed to, I guess, elicit a laugh. But you probably noticed, like, wow, you guys do a lot of research on frit. Like, what's going on? What's that discussion like? Well, again, people are like, keep having this discussion. What if we can use augmented reality, do a really quick proof of concept of a tool that would leverage AR through a web-based platform, allow designers to look really quickly at a series of patterns, either image-based or geometry-based, and just simply begin to iterate through using more of an AR platform on glass to understand those potential patterns. This is a proof of concept tool. Proof of concepts often look like this image right here. You can see iteration after iteration after iteration after iteration, a long project, 2013 to present, of trying to provide a platform for us to collect information, collect measurements in space, high density, low cost sensor network that provides real-time information on phenomena that's occurring in spaces. We've tested this with about 25 different architects. More recently, we're just launching this tool that's going to allow our profession to organize post-occupancy evaluations, and more specifically thermal comfort surveys, where people are asked a range of questions, and their questions are actually mapped to the exact location. Their answers are mapped to the exact location that they're in their space. So not only do we get data about how they feel, how hot they are, how cold they are, if they like the brightness of something, if they don't, right? But we also begin to get a map of a space, and you can begin to define microclimates in this space, and you can begin to look like, well, wow, people over here are a little more cold than the people over here. They're kind of hot. What are the factors that are contributing to that? These are platforms. You know, another, and this is the final platform that I'll show you, final project I'll show you. Another platform is, you know, a construction logic platform that we're developing for India. This is equally a platform. So one that, it's a construction system. It's comprised of about 5 different components. It's trying to take what is a more normative cast-in-place frame logic, or a frame and fill logic, where you have cast-in-place frame with masonry, trying to address a whole range of goals related to climate, resource conservation, cost targets in logistics and material handling, and compress all those goals into 5 really smart components, the smartest of which is a column component whose depth and width allow it to be a column wall, and allow it to, it permits a certain amount of self-shading. All of this has required a range of research in terms of construction logistics in India, material availability, but the system is nonetheless vertically expandable and horizontally expandable. The range of queries that we've done here include mixed design for concrete around all of the different aggregates that are available in India, especially since we were trying to eliminate initially material handling equipment. So we're working with a whole bunch of lightweight materials and doing a series of mixed designs on lightweight aggregate. It also required us to invest in pattern seeking that would eliminate or let's just say increase the amount of self-shading on very specific surfaces that were going to likely receive a lot of sun. It required a lot of prototyping back and forth between our partners in India and our shop in Philadelphia. Component by component, we built up a prototyping protocol until we were able to realize our first prototype in Ahmedabad in 2013. And in this prototype, every column you see there is a different mix design. We're testing 5 or 10 different things at one time when we were building this initial prototype. And then more recently, in the image that you saw at the outset, we were able to test the horizontal and vertical expansion of the prototype. So why do we research? As I mentioned at the opening, there's never been a more pressing moment than now to test the boundaries of our design agency. And then I really do believe that. We research because research increases the agency of the architect, which gets me to my final couple of slides. I just want to mention briefly why we're doing what we're doing, or give you a sense of what we're doing in our studio. So our studio is really trying to take up this question of expanding design agency and testing the boundaries of our design agency. In our studio, we recognize that we are awash in a changing climate. We're overwhelmed by a material glut, and we wonder what, if anything, our form-making powers amount to when they are meted out one building at a time. So you have to ask this question when you look at the range of things that you can do, but the smallness of architecture Can something small like architecture make a substantive impact to correct our course? Will something large like a global industrial building materials complex, which includes extractors and processors and manufacturers, reset pace and purpose? Now, I wrote this because one day on my desk I got an article that it showed up, and it was published by Building Green, and it was titled "The Urgency of Embodied Carbon and What You Can Do About It." And I was just in the midst of teaching this studio and working on the subject with several students in the audience. Now, this is an interesting title because the urgency is, in this instance, the building materials manufacturing process, or the manufacturing problem. They were addressing emissions, not only carbon, to land, air, and sea, but the what you could do caught my eye. What they were appealing to was our power, and yes, again, our agency. They were trying to basically say, hey, don't focus on building operations. You got to focus on building materials if you want to solve the carbon problem. They were actually trying to say that you can take up new concepts and new tools. You could reshape your design habits. But I think more often than not, we have to be suspicious of that type of advice. This was evidence that answers to these big questions are forming, but I guess the bigger question we're asking in the studio is it possible to tackle the sum of the complex rather than resort to incremental tooling up? Can we rethink the whole shebang? And I mean the relationship between architecture, ecology, materials, energy governance, building culture, and beauty. So really, the purpose of our design studio is to test the purpose of the design studio is that it is one place where we can test the boundaries and reimagine design agency. We can establish a serious pedagogy. We can examine broad, unwieldy questions. We can experiment with possible positions. This is why studio is so awesome. And so we began our studio with an experiment that I'm going to leave you with. Okay? Here's the experiment. I'm going to read it twice. In the woods, there are 3 sites. The first site, the land, is set aside for materials extraction. The second site, the factory, is a place for materials processing and manufacture. The third site, the trailhead, is home to the center of land use history and ecological interpretation. At the trailhead, the center for land use history and ecological interpretation, is constructed with raw materials extracted from the land. And these materials are processed at the factory. Both the trailhead and the land have to resonate as culturally significant places and experiences. That premise is deceptively simple. You might say we do that day in and day out. We have the power to through those relationships. The designers who have the power to extract materials, process them, assemble them into construction systems can actually challenge the very system boundary of architectural form making. They are poised to design through a socio-ecological framework. They're poised to draw a boundary around usable and less usable resources and conspire to create materials, construction logics, and new building forms. So the immediate reaction to a premise that simple, there are 3 sites. One site gives us materials. One site takes away materials. And one site is where we do something to those materials. The immediate reaction usually goes in 1,000 different directions. Some construe this premise as a bid for hyper-localism. Some for hyper-do-it-yourselfism. Both those positions are wrong. Some decry it as a flavor of survivalism, and maybe, given the issues that I've outlined as I began this, maybe that does stick. Some retort, you can't be serious. We're very serious. Others turn the premise over and over and ask, is the land a real place? Yes, the land's a real place. Others jump immediately to architectural tropes with the retort, but what about transparency? Meaning that all the materials found on the land, none of them are transparent. What do I do about transparency? What about the cantilever? There's no iron ore there. What do we do about structural tactics? So what I've noticed is that every time I present the studio, I usually field those questions for about 5 minutes, and at the end, the light bulb of, this is the grounds for a new way to be. And I always say yes, yes, it is. All right, so thank you. Thank you for your patience. So I'm really happy to answer questions about Karen Timberlake, but since we have a group full of students, I want to do something a little different, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm very happy to answer questions about my own personal trajectory, because often students want to ask questions about that or questions about what it's like to work at Karen Timberlake. I'm happy to answer a whole range of different types of questions if we can take a couple.
We're going to try to get him spoken into the microphones.
Okay.
Who wants to start?
You can ask me anything, like, research is research. Don't be intimidated.
Hi, my name's Akshata. Thank you for the lecture. It was pretty inspiring and very relevant to what I want to do.
Yeah?
I really appreciate how your studio is so collaborative with other fields, and also appreciate how unapologetically explorative you guys are. And my question is, well, I've always felt like our college was in a bubble, kind of. And I've always wondered what it would be like to work with people in engineering field and the ag field and et cetera, et cetera. So my question is actually about our school. How do you think we can start breaking out of this bubble and start to work with other people in different fields?
One thing that I've learned about trying that is that it doesn't happen by you waiting for permission. Am I allowed to say that? In all of the work that we do, if I waited for a grant to come in, if I waited for actual funding, if I waited for permission to assemble a team, half of those projects, actually almost 90% of those projects that you just saw, wouldn't have happened. In other words, what we found is that in order to test these types of relationships, we just had to identify a question that we could all get around, ask and answer, and we had to find people. I mean, you can imagine this. We have folks that have training in all of these other fields who actually have said, I'm not going to take up my primary field. I'm going to come work in this other field. And actually, to be honest, many of the folks that are working with us have multiple degrees. We have folks in our office who have degrees in anthropology, environmental engineering, and architecture. That's one person. Physics, environmental management, and architecture. Chemical physics and architecture. Right? That's part of it too. But you have to find a project that you want to do and bring people together to do it. And don't wait for permission. Prove concepts and use your proof of concepts as a basis for then aspiring to a much more robust project. I've learned that. I can attest to it. Other questions for me? Anything confusing? Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
At the National Conference for Landscape Architecture this year in Philly, Stephanie Carlisle from Karen Timberlake was on a research-based panel.
Did you see her in there?
I did.
Yeah.
And
she's been here at the school?
Yes.
Yeah.
Among the other panelists who were talking about the importance of research in their various firms, they talked about the importance of open source data.
Yeah.
And how much does Karen Timberlake kind of churn back into that system, and how much is used as a jumping off point from the open source data?
One of the reasons why we did the Love Park project is because we were trying to evidence to the city how important it was to build up data sets that designers could use about the spaces that we inhabit. And in other words, there is open source data, but then there's also lack of data. There's the building up of open source data sets, and then there's the building up of quality open source data sets, right? But that's absolutely something that we support, that we participate in, and that we're generally interested in, not just open source data, but being able to contribute to open source peer review or open source publishing, open source tools, etc. Yeah. Other questions for me? Other questions for me? Yeah, Rachel?
So, in 6 Facts, 6 Scales, like,
Yeah.
I don't know how many weeks ago, we talked about, like, defining your agency.
Yes.
And at that moment, you didn't quite tell us, like, maybe how you defined your agency. So I guess my question is, like, how did you come upon, I think your agency is researching.
Yep.
Or asking questions, but how did you come upon that? And then how have others found other types of agency?
Yeah.
And what are those?
Yeah. No, so for my own personal trajectory, I guess, I mean, I have a feeling that some folks in this audience are probably like me. I'm a sort of really, I'm kind of a natural born sleuth. I love figuring out why things are the way that they are. So a bit of an epistemological bent. How much can you know something? So that's, part of me. And then simultaneously, I grew up with a father who was a builder. I grew up in the profession of construction. And all of our dinner time conversation was around all the things that went wrong on his construction sites. So when you match like a constant stream of information, I sort of did my career in reverse, I feel like, a constant stream of information about what's wrong with construction with someone who has a tendency to sleuth. I think there's a pairing there. There was a pairing there for me that I realized there's a whole realm of things to ask about how we build, why we build the way that we do, and then how deeply I could take that question into understanding environmental phenomena, understanding material characteristics and phenomena, just simply constantly asking that question. I've only found out recently that, and I didn't realize, I didn't have a consciousness of this, but I just found out recently, having talked to my first design professors in architecture, that I drove them crazy in my first studio because I kept asking them questions. And it was Ellen Weinstein at North Carolina State University who pointed out to me that I actually amazingly found a job that was perfectly suited to me. And I was like, yeah, oh my gosh, I'm in my 40s and you're absolutely right. I did find a job that was perfectly suited. Yeah. Yeah. There are other types of agency though, other descriptions for agency. But I have a feeling that you all have things you're passionate about. That's simply what I did. So I've been pursuing something that I'm passionate about. I love working across disciplines. I think there's something to it. Hate silos. Simple. Love design. Other questions for me? Do you have one?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much. That was fascinating and really beautifully delivered. I was struck during your talk about at times how easy it looked.
Yeah.
Right? How easy it was to think, oh, that's what research is.
Yeah.
And then at other times about how difficult or maybe involved or kind of drawn out it seemed, or incredibly scientific or technologically complicated and so on. So can you talk a little bit about, making it easy versus making it hard in terms of research?
What we found is that given the methods that are represented in our firm, the people with very specific kinds of skill sets, what we found is that we can ask questions that are very much on the limits of our knowledge base. And that does make it easy and make it hard. It's easy to identify what we're curious about. It's easy sometimes to create a value argument for why we need to go after that information. It's sometimes even easy to prove that that information is valuable. But what gets really hard is that often you want to increase your certainty over what you're investigating. Often you want to make sure that what you've found stands up to what's happening let's just say at a peer level in that field of knowledge. So the deeper we go into a subject matter like thermodynamics, the more we have to depend on that peer field and really get into the mechanics of phase change at very, 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 very small scales, right? And that gets us into fields where we're just like, whoa, hold on a second, wait, right? But I found that it's about increasing, when we increase resolution of information, we often find out just how much we don't know and how much further we have to go, and we have to make this decision about if we want to, whether or not we want to go that far. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is there tension in the office between the perspective you gave us on the office through focusing on research and
Yeah.
agency and people who just want to crank out amazing things or
Yeah.
bust a move, as we say,
Yeah.
and not be kind of dragged down by, the bigger
But
picture?
you mean like, doing quantitative stuff is a drain?
No, I mean I'm interested in the tension between, sort of, but just
Yeah.
the tension between designers who want to, kind
Use
of...
their intuition?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's what's, is there a tension? I think that that what you would hear us all say is that when the tension is non-productive, it's not interesting. But we have some really productive tensions that get us to better places. So yeah, of course, I don't know what the research methods training looks like at this college, but we all know, I certainly wasn't trained in research methods, right? I'm just a sleuth. I like certain things. So when you put a bunch of designers in a room, how do we define research? Often it's not the same way as science fields define research. When you put a bunch of folks that were trained in science fields in a room with designers, you have to work through and develop new vocabulary, new shorthand, in order to allow both to thrive simultaneously. And that's where the tension comes in. Absolutely. Other questions for me? No? Kyra, come on. I see you. I see you want to ask me a question.
Here.
Yeah. The question you want to ask that you're afraid to ask.
So I'm just asking the question for you. Do you have a big question which
Yeah.
you haven't answered yet, and you haven't gotten a chance to? What's the biggest question that you haven't
Biggest
gotten a
question I've
chance to
been
answer
asking
yet?
for since I was a kid is, why do we build the way that we do? You got an answer for me?
No, but I think that's one you've been working on, right?
I've been
In
working-
pieces, right? Is there some chunk of that, or some big thing that
Something
you'd
that's-
love to have the $1 million grant come in for that you haven't done yet? It's
Well,
on the list.
I would love to have us tackle more specifically in our profession evidence that suggests that designing and the design process is something that should be open and accessible to all, that it's equal on and on par with math and reading. And I don't know how to do that. But I'd love to see access to those processes be something that we take up, or that way of thinking be something we take up very seriously. We know there's people that are working on that, but I just wonder, I wonder how much more we can do as a profession to get at that. And probably not where you expect me to take that answer.
Nowhere.
Other questions for me?
Okay. Maybe one more after this.
Are there questions that you know the answer to that you like to ask?
Well,
Your
I do know the
students,
answer to
maybe?
why we build it the way that we do. No, I'm joking. I don't know the answer to that. Are there questions that I know the answer to that I won't, that I like to ask my students? No. I like to have conversations about questions. I certainly have stored up a lot of knowledge, but I'm always questioning my knowledge. So, the limits. Yeah. Okay, one more question. Yep.
Okay, yeah, last one.
This is just a materials question. One of the projects that you had clear walls. It looked like something that was stretched, some sort of polymer.
Yeah.
And you described that as what?
Was that was that cellophane house?
Yes.
Yeah, that was PET. Coke bottle.
Uh-huh. So my question is, why didn't you use like polymethyl methacrylate for that? Something that
Acrylic?
that doesn't degenerate in the sun.
Well, it actually, in that instance, we have a UV, we have one of the layers of PET has a UV layer on it.
Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
Yeah, so we were, yeah.
I just wondered about that.
Yeah, and we were also interested in something that was already fully substantiated into a recycling stream. If that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, we were interested in the Coke bottle relationship. I mean, it's a little accessible. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you. Thanks.